Live, local, late breaking. This is WVAL TV 11 News.
And as we celebrate our veterans today, it's important to recognize the history of the actual day. And joining us live this morning with more is our celebrity historian, Raffi Andonian. Good morning. Thanks for being here.
Good morning. Happy Veterans Day. Great time to be here for the commemoration, especially in this part of the country.
For sure. You know, we have so much history here. You know, my dad's a vet. My husband is one too. And you can tell us where this actually began.
The Great War, World War I, the war to end all wars, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Now, funny enough, in the 11th hour, 11th day, 11th month, in 2011, I was actually at an airport at London Heathrow trying to catch a transfer flight from England, obviously, to Spain to present at a conference. Get this, I'm rushing, the whole airport stopped. They put a commemoration over the PA system. Everything stopped. I missed my flight because of it. That's how important Armistice Day, as it became known, was around the world, and it still is today. Well, in the United States, that importance of Armistice Day is what picks up steam. And after World War I, after World War II, especially when they begin to have now World War II and Korean War veterans incorporated into the mix. And Veterans Day celebrations on Armistice Day are going to start to happen on November 11th throughout the country and community level, although the federal government at some point recognized Veterans Day in October, not November 11th. Armistice Day was separate, but because of community pressure in the grassroots, eventually the federal government changes it from October to November to commemorate all veterans on the same day, originating World War I.
So many people confuse Veterans Day with Memorial Day, completely separate, of course.
Absolutely.
This is a day to really honor the veterans and thank them for their service.
That's right, and I think that's a great opportunity to talk about the origins of commemorating veterans in the first place. It goes before World War II. Now, after the American Revolution, we were not so great at commemorating veterans. For example, the government gave IOU promissory notes that they didn't deliver on, and veterans often were forced into trying to sell them for speculation to try to make some money because they had poor job opportunities because they had lost years in the military. So we didn't treat them very well. It was decades before we started a pension for the Revolutionary War veterans. That's part of the reason veterans groups started early on in the early republic, to help support veterans, create historic monuments and charity. And Fort McHenry right here in Baltimore is the center of that story. In the War of 1812, as it's known, of course, which is really 3 years, you had the Battle of Fort McHenry, birthplace of the Star-Spangled Banner in 1814, the commemorative quarter right here from 10 years ago in circulation still. In 2013, commemorating the Star-Spangled Fort McHenry. Now, that story is really powerful in a commemoration because only 1 year later, in 1815, veterans groups, known as defenders, gather here in Baltimore. As the War of 1812 memory faded, it didn't here in Baltimore. And that was really important because later, a generation later, when there was some commemoration as they were losing veterans to the War of 1812, various groups started to get together to try to consolidate nationally. And then after the Civil War, with mass destruction, there was a renewed effort to commemorate the War of 1812, kind of as a nostalgia to a simpler time when it wasn't quite as destructive and bitter as the Civil War. The War of 1812 starts to really get big again in national consciousness as it does so. And these various grassroots groups again start to nationalize. There's the General Society of the Veterans of War of 1812, which still exists today, comes together in 1890s. That's when it's finally formed nationally. And they drew their origins with the approval of the defenders to Fort McHenry in 1814. That's where it begins, believe it or not. And that period with the War of 1812 commemoration that gets nationalized thanks to Fort McHenry folks, also is part of a larger commemoration of veterans. You have the Grand Army of the Republic for the Civil War. You got the United Confederate Veterans, of course, for the Confederate side. And the sons and daughters of the American Revolution, it's not the veterans, but their descendants, all happens in the same period, the 1880s, 1890s. And it's in that context that later on, not long after, you have World War I and back to the origins of Veterans Day. There's this period of looking back to veterans that is taking place at that time. But again, that traces back locally here to Baltimore, where it was still popular to remember Defenders Day, the place of the birthplace of the Star-Spangled Banner, and arguably the turning point of the War of 1812, because of course the British had burned DC, but they weren't going to get it here. That really leads to popularization of veterans groups today, and they're who started the battle monument here in Baltimore as well.
You look back and you think about veterans not being celebrated, you said, really after the Revolutionary War. And in modern times, we think more of the Vietnam War, the veterans coming back and not being really recognized and having such a hard time. You don't realize that that history goes back so far.
That's such a great point because it shows you that history is about change over time. It's not you know, we often think, well, of course, it's obvious that we would honor veterans, especially if you were not around to witness a Vietnam.
Sure.
But when you look historically, it ebbs and flows based on what's going on. One of the things that often influences that we're experiencing right now is with World War II, the recent monument in World War II in D.C., of course. As you lose the last of the generation, you tend to sort of say, wait a minute, what are we losing here? That happened with the War of 1812, part of the reason 1880s, 90s, it starts to get popular. It's happening now with World War II, and I think we're revisiting it with Vietnam as well, and I think that'll pick up in the coming years too, as Vietnam Wars veterans are getting fewer and fewer, and more media coverage starts to happen on some of those veterans.
And there are Marylanders who have received the Medal of Honor, of course.
In the Civil War is a great story. You have the Battle of Chaffin Farm, which includes action at Newmarket Heights. There are 16 Medal of Honor winners there, of which 14 are United States colored troops. And from those 14, 3 of them, all from the Chesapeake, were the initial ones to pierce the enemy line in that key battle as part of the siege of Petersburg, which I would say is the turning point of the war, beginning of the end for General Lee. And within those 3, 2 of them are from Maryland. It's William Henry Barnes and James Harris. They were from right here in Maryland, in coastal Maryland.
Pictures.
There are the photos, exactly. Medal of Honor winners. They are also memorialized in in St. Mary's County. There's a monument known as the United States Colored Troops Memorial. You'll find both of them on there as well. And what you're seeing on screen there is a more recent Medal of Honor winner from Afghanistan. So we have the historic, now a more recent one. His name is Florent Groberg, and he was commemorated, or he's given the honor, you can see from President Obama there, for having thwarted a suicide bomber, without regard for his life, as the account puts it. He got in the way, got in front of the unit, pushed the first one out, the second one was trying to approach, but because of his risk for his life, and the suicide bombs did detonate. They did have some casualties, but dramatically fewer casualties because he risked his life, putting himself in the way and pushing him away from his unit. That's how he got it, and also a Marylander himself.
And that's what Veterans Day is all about.
Continuing the heritage from Fort McHenry to the Civil War with the USCT, and of course over to Afghanistan. Rich history right here, contributing to the honor and importance of Veterans Day.
Thank you so much for coming. What a great history lesson you just gave us all, and in a very short amount of time, too, Raffi. Thank you so much, and thank you to all the veterans out there. Stay with us. Still ahead in our next half hour of 11 News Saturday morning.